Hey guys, welcome back. Today is something a little bit different. I'm going to be sharing elements of my own story in relation to the topic that we're going to discuss today. And as always, it's relatively off the cuff. I've written down a few little notes that are there just so I can remind myself of where I'm going with the conversation, because I'm thinking it's going to be a relatively long one. Excuse the dog in the background, but essentially today what we're going to discuss is why you may have to give up on your dreams. And I can completely understand that when I say that, you may get on the back foot and think, well, what's he talking about? Giving up on my dreams? That is all we're ever told to pursue in life. Pursue our dreams, follow our heart. And he's saying, give up on our dreams? Now look, I'm not saying to categorically give up on your dreams for every single one of you, but there's probably a large number of you, given at the moment there's not a large number of people watching these videos, but like if you were to take the population and look at a percentage, a large number of those people, for those people, it would be worth rethinking what their dreams actually are. Who shaped their dreams? You know, what external influences had such an influence over their dreams that they no longer really resonate with what those dreams actually are. So there's a lot more that I'll go into, but there are some core fundamental reasons why our dreams may be flawed and why they may be leading us down a path that doesn't necessarily align with who we actually are as people. So it's such an interesting discussion because, as I just mentioned, our whole lives we're pushed toward the direction to follow our dreams. Yet the irony is that the societies and the systems that we grow up in are designed to dampen our enthusiasm and dampen our dreams towards essentially being the best version of ourselves. And that's not the case for everyone. And I'm not going to sit here and just bash, the school and education system, because I've come through it and I'm a better person for having come through it. But at the same time, it's not necessarily designed to allow you to become your 100% authentic self. And in order to form dreams that, I guess, allow you to become that version of yourself, we must first learn how to think originally and learn how to think authentically. So before we really engage into sort of the depths of what our dreams actually are, how they're shaped, I can't really speak with credibility without sharing my own story on how I've battled with this and how I've battled with really finding out who I am, what my dreams and hopes for the future really are. Because as people, isn't that all we're trying to do? We're trying to, especially young people, we're trying to figure out, well, who am I, firstly? What is it that makes me me? What is it that allows me to provide value to other people? And what are my hopes for the future? And what does my life look like that's going to make me deeply fulfilled and satisfied with what I'm doing? And in order to actually figure that out, the first step is to really consider who you are and what your values are and what do you enjoy. So, my story. I'm not sure how far to go back. I literally haven't planned this at all. I'm just going to speak raw and openly from where I've come from and sort of my background. I think that allows you guys to get a better idea and understanding of what I'm doing, and maybe can appreciate a little bit more what I'm doing with my running, and just in general. I feel like it helps to really know that person behind the camera. I've done a lot of journaling in the past, and I don't think there's any better way of journaling than actually speaking, whether it's to a friend or in front of the camera. In my case, posting it online for anyone and everyone to see and to pass judgment on me, if you wish, but I don't really care, to be honest. But so essentially, I'm 23 years old now, so I was born in January of 2002. So grew up in the suburbs, outside of Melbourne, within the city, in my family with my mum and dad, with my brother and sister. Older brother, he's 2.5 years older. My sister's about 2.5 years younger than me. So the middle child, and was always sport obsessed. Was always, I put these athletes on a pedestal. From as soon as I could walk, I was kicking a ball around, I was running, I was riding my bike. And I just love the idea of becoming one of these real life superheroes. Obviously I've skipped a bit of time, like when I was three 3 or 4, I started to kind of have these, fascinations and curiosity around sport and around athletes. And there was something that I was just so drawn to. Granted, you are the product of the influences around you, and my dad was pretty sport obsessed. My older brother was always playing sports as well. So, that kind of lends itself to the idea that our dreams aren't necessarily 100% our own. They are shaped by those who you surround yourself by. And yeah, so I grew up absolutely loved sport. My AFL football team, Carlton, I was besotted by them, like loved all the players. My dad actually worked for the club, so I surrounded myself around those guys, fairly often, just took that for granted. But to me, they just stood 10 feet tall and they were real life superheroes. And I always wanted to become one of those players. You see people asking them for photos, they're signing autographs, they're so gracious, they come across really kind. They're out there like real life gladiators, and I just thought that was the most amazing thing you could ever do. I did not believe that anything in life could ever top that experience. Whether to this day I have changed my opinion, I mean, somewhat, but I still do believe that would be amazing. To have that level of, I guess, power to inspire so many young kids and do great work. That was something that I was always really drawn to. So there it was, my dream was set from such a young age. Not necessarily to be an AFL player, but to become an athlete, to become a professional athlete. And that was all I wanted to do, whether it was to play in the AFL, to be an Olympian, was all I ever wanted to do. So growing up, I started athletics as well. After the 2008 Olympics, when I watched Usain Bolt, I insisted to my mum, I have to join Little Athletics. So my mum took me down to the track. I think I was under 6 or under 7, and my best friend was running there as well. And everyone wears a uniform, and I just came down for a trial day, and I wasn't wearing a uniform. I wasn't wearing any specific track shoes. I was just in these heavy runners, and we lined up for a 100-meter run, 100-meter sprint. And in my first race, I didn't know anyone apart from my best friend. No one knew me. As a 7-year-old, I've ran and I've broken the club record in my first race. And I always knew that I could run fast around the playground, but I was 7 years old and I'd never ran on a track before, and I'd broken this record, and all these people coming up to me and being like, wow, like, great job, you should join this club, and receiving that praise at a young age for doing something I was good at was just such an addictive feeling, and I was hooked straight away. I loved running. I loved the feeling of people congratulating me, of people praising me. So from that day onwards, I was hooked on athletics. I was hooked on running. I'd run in the summer, I'd play footy in the winter, and the two kind of went hand in hand and they complemented each other. So I'd say from the age of 6 or 7, I was completely hooked on becoming a professional athlete. There was nothing else in the world I wanted to do. And when you have that kind of mindset from a young age, it potentially does narrow your focus, so you don't necessarily allow yourself to have those thoughts and experiences that are outside of becoming an athlete, if that makes sense. And that was my identity. I was always the kid who could run. I was always the kid that was good at footy. I'd always tried in school because my parents really pushed for that, and I was fine to do that, but I guess it always tied itself back into the value of hard work. From a young age, I loved training hard. Like, my parents had to pull me back from training outside. And I'm not saying this to boast. If anything, at times in my life, it's been kind of detrimental for me. Like, that addictive kind of personality to always want to get better and train. Like, it really, at times, if you don't learn how to control those feelings, can be harmful. But that's who I was. I was 7, 8. I just wanted to be the best. I wanted to be the best footy player. I wanted to be the best runner. I wanted to constantly improve, and that's easy to do. It's easy to constantly improve when you're growing and you're going through such a phase of development when you're 7 or 8. But at some point that slows up. But it wasn't slowing up anytime soon. So I continued to grow, through primary school, was on national teams for when I was 10, 11, 12 for athletics. And things were going really well. A few injuries, like disappointing injuries. When I was 12 years old, I fractured my hip while I was sprinting. A muscle pulled really hard on the bone, fractured the bone. I missed my national competition, which was devastating for me. So along the way, you have little setbacks, but all in all, I was tracking quite well. I'd won state championships, medaled in my state little athletics competitions along those years, and was really proud of myself. Was winning football best and fairest for my junior club, and was tracking in the right direction. I thought I was the man, or the kid. I was 11 or 12. I made a state representative football team when I was in under 12s, and a bunch of those guys who I was in the team with now, or then, playing AFL now. So naturally, I thought, that's just the trajectory you go on. Things are going to work out for me. That's just the way it works. I'm such a successful kid in my athletic endeavors that things are just going to pan out as I would expect. As you can tell by me sitting here and sharing the story with you, it's not exactly what happened. My big breakthrough in terms of performance came when I was in high school. I'd come back from my hip fracture. I'd done a fair bit of strength and conditioning work. I'd grown naturally a fair bit. And it's worth mentioning my events in athletics were the long jump and 400 meters, which was a bit of an unorthodox combination. But I came back from my hip, so rehabbed and played footy over the winter. And then November, there were the state trials for what's called the All Schools Championships. And I'd won the long jump, and I'd come second in the 400. So I'd qualified for the nationals, which were a month later. And I'd never won an individual national medal before. So I went to those national championships with such optimism and belief in myself, a belief that gradually over time I started to lose. But I had such belief in myself in that moment. And when it came to the long jump competition, essentially how it happened was I jumped the furthest jump in the first round, and I was leading all the way through to the last round. There were 4 rounds. And then on the last round, someone edged me and jumped just ahead of me. So I was the last jumper. It came down to me when I was 13 years old. I had such belief in myself that I could do it. I knew that I was going to do it, and I launched down that runway, and I beat my personal best by 30 centimeters, which is a ruler. Like, that is unheard of. That is unheard of in long jump. I mean, obviously when you're a kid and you're growing, you can break your personal best by that much, but I feel like the belief that I had in myself was unlike any belief I'd had in any other moment. It was just something came over me, and I was possessed down that runway. So I'd say in terms of athletic achievements, that was probably the best athletic achievement I've ever done. To be able to produce that in that moment as a child, I've always been proud of that. I ended up coming third in the 400 in that event as well. I don't know if this is relevant, but it feels like it is. I guess preparing for those national competitions, I trained incredibly hard. I have vivid memories of me being 9, 10, 11, running myself that hard that I would vomit. I would vomit as a child. Like, my mum would be trying to say, stop, like, this isn't good for you, but I couldn't help it. I said, this is me, this is what I want to do. I was driven myself. I grew up on watching Rocky movies. It's all I ever wanted to be. I wanted to be someone who pushed their body to the limits and got the absolute most out of themselves. Even from such a young age, that was who I wanted to be. I wanted to be an athlete, and I was so inspired by these footballers and by these Olympians and athletes that were doing everything they could to get the most out of themselves that I didn't want to do anything else. And I'm not saying that just to boast and to say, oh, look at me, I was so disciplined. Like, I didn't even think about that stuff. It was just who I was. It was who I was. And yeah, I battled with so much anxiety and performance anxiety and stress around competitions, and I didn't perform my best a lot of the time, but they're all learnings. But I guess the underlying theme was that I was addicted to getting better and getting the most out of myself. But that got really tough when I probably peaked when I was 13 or 14. I won another national title in Perth the following year. And then footy starts to get a little bit more serious, and it demands more of your time and focus, more of training, and it starts to compete. And with athletics, I didn't really grow. I probably grew maybe 5 to 10 centimeters from when I was like 12 to 17, 18 when I stopped growing, whereas other kids would just grow an astronomical amount. And that was really hard to handle because I'd achieved such heights and such great results at a young age that I kept training so hard, I kept striving for results, yet I was limited by my body. I wasn't able to jump as far as these other kids that grew to 6'2", 6'3", and I'm just 5'9". That I wasn't as strong and powerful as these kids as they grew past me, and there wasn't much I could do about it. I kept trying, I kept training. I gave everything, like blood, sweat, and literally tears. I would be crying when my performances weren't at the standard that I wanted and I wasn't improving the way I wanted to. I'd be crying to my mum. It just felt like such a tough slog, and in the end, it broke me. You know, it broke me that I wasn't improving the way I wanted to, and the dreams of whether it was becoming an Olympian were essentially slashed. And it got to the point when I was 16 that I was training so hard for athletics and I was training so hard for footy that the two just met in the middle, and one had to give way. And I remember my last ever race, which to this day brings me so much shame. And to think that that was my last ever race in athletics when the sport meant so much to me, and when I sit here in front of the camera and preach the importance of giving your all in anything you do and not worrying too much about the external result, this particular race that was my last one brings me so much sadness. You know, it was a state championship under 16 final, and I'd qualified fastest for that final. I was in the middle lanes, and to put into context, I was training footy Monday, Wednesday, training athletics Tuesday, Thursday, competing on the weekend, and I was just shot. I was so tired, I was broken. My performances in athletics hadn't improved. I was spent. That was a Saturday. I had the long jump the day of the 400 meter final and completely fucked it. Like, excuse my language, but it was embarrassing. I couldn't land on the board. I was jumping fouls. I made an absolute embarrassment of myself. I couldn't handle the disappointment that I'd been experiencing for so long that I jumped. I think my run-up was just all over the place. I jumped about that far behind the board. It wasn't a jump that I was happy with, and I just cracked it, and I walked through the back of the sand, didn't even allow the jump to be measured. And my coach just looked at me, he's like, what are you doing? Like, you know, we've come this far. And he knew it was probably one of my last competitions, and he looked at me, he's like, I could see in his eyes, he was thinking, is this what it's come to, you know? All of your success, all of the memories we've made, and you've gone and embarrassed yourself like this. And that was really difficult to swallow. And I had to come back 3 hours later to compete in the 400 meter final, which I'd qualified fastest in. I can probably find the video, and I don't really want to overlay it. Also, if you don't believe any of this, like, I guess that's your prerogative, but I've got no reason to be lying. So I line up for that 400 meter final, and I start well, as I always do. I always had to go out fast because I didn't necessarily have the strength to come home hard. And I'm running 250 meters in when you're coming around that top bend, and I felt all these boys come up on my shoulder, and I just got so heavy. I couldn't change gears, I couldn't keep up, and they came past me as we're entering the front straight with 100 meters to go, and I just started jogging. I started jogging. Like, it brings me so much sadness. I've only brought myself to watch the video once, and I couldn't watch it ever again. I couldn't handle losing. I couldn't handle not amounting to what I thought I would. Whereas I look back and think, yeah, that may be true, but the most important thing you can ever strive for is giving your best effort 100% of the time. Because if you do that, there's quite literally not much more you can do. And I did that in training. I prepared, I did my best. Sure, I didn't grow, I didn't become the athletic specimen that some of these boys ended up becoming, but I needed to give my all in that moment, and I fell short. And I jogged through the line, came last by about, 30 meters. And it was embarrassing for me, and that was my last ever race. You know, I had to go back to footy, and I feel like that kind of attitude carried over for a couple of years, in all honesty. I battled so hard with not achieving the results that I thought that I was destined for. And that was heartbreaking. It destroyed me, in all honesty. Makes me sad just thinking about it, really. But that's sport at times, and I guess the only regret I have is not having my last race be my best effort and give it my all and be the man in the arena in that moment. And regardless of the results, if I fell short, at least I knew that I gave it everything I had. And I could not say that in that moment. In fact, it's the exact opposite. I flopped and I gave up. You know, I gave up in that moment. Regardless, I pushed forward to footy. My focus shifted. I wanted to get drafted into the AFL. And for years, that was my dream. You know, from a kid, that kind of followed all the way through. And even through athletics, I thought, well, chances are I'm not going to become one of the best in the world. There's just too many freaks across other countries. So at least this is preparing me for my football career. And I got to that point, and I was at the kind of essentially in this area. It's known as the Sandringham Dragons, and they're a very successful junior club that AFL clubs draft players from. And I was through that pathway and everything was tracking nicely for me until all of a sudden it wasn't. And it's my own doing. You know, I was in year 12. I was getting drafted. My draft year would be the next year, but I was in year 12, my 17-year-old year, which is meant to be a really important year for your development. And I was focused on my studies at school, but I was also not training anywhere near as hard as I needed to. I was resting on my laurels. I thought it would just happen for me, but it wasn't the way it worked out. You know, I'm sure I played some good footy that year, but the Sandringham Dragons, this club was so strong. They had so many good players, even like especially those that were older than me, that I couldn't break into the team. I was going to get an opportunity early in the year, which would have been huge, but I strained my hamstring in a school athletics competition, which ruled me out. So look, there's too much to go over, and I'm taking so much time up in this video so that if you did need to skip through, that's not a problem. But essentially that year did not amount to my expectations. I wasn't in the frame to get drafted at all. I was completely bypassed by all these other kids and I was lost. So we entered 2020. I've just finished school. I've deferred my university course because I want to take a gap year to focus on getting drafted. I want to give it everything. And I have a good preseason. I'm training hard. I'm still not in favor with these coaches, which, as I said, is my own doing, our own responsibility for that. And then COVID happens and there's a pandemic and there is no football for the whole year. So I put my whole life on hold. I can't rejoin university. It's cooked. I'm sitting at home doing absolutely nothing. I set up a home gym in my backyard, and if it wasn't for that, God knows where I'd be, because I was in a dark place. And that was that. So I was 18 years old. I was seeing people my age getting drafted. I was seeing them be celebrated on TV. I was seeing them being praised, and everything I'd worked for all through my childhood, the sessions where I was throwing up, the sessions, the sacrifices that I make, not going on nights out when I was 16, 17 with my friends, drinking alcohol, having fun, the sacrifices that I'd made, everything that I'd tried for, everything that I'd pursued in my life, my identity was broken down. And that was the COVID year. So 2020, 2021, the Dragons invited 19-year-olds back, and I came back, but you're also competing with the kids the year before, the year younger. It was their draft year as well. This is all very confusing if you're not familiar with the system, so I apologize, but essentially that year didn't work out for me either. And that was a year that I turned it around. I trained as hard as I possibly could, gave it everything, and you know, it didn't work for me. I started a degree which I couldn't handle, too much stress. I was too focused and consumed by footy. There was COVID in the background, but we came back and played a few games. I was working at Woolworths, the supermarket, pretty much full time, and I knew deep down that I wasn't getting drafted. I knew deep down, and I was filled with so much shame in that period. And I remember vividly working in my supermarket, and I saw a group of boys that had gotten drafted that were my age, that I knew, and I was stacking shelves in the supermarket. You know, I'm not just saying this story to make myself a victim. It's actually what happened and how I was feeling in that moment. And the sadness and the shame that I felt, I had to hide myself. I went down and locked myself in the bathroom while those boys were shopping in the vegetable section, which was where I was working, because I was so embarrassed. You know, I thought, how could a national champion, a 3-time national champion as a junior, amount to this? How has this ended up being my life? I was so embarrassed. I was so sad, and that was such a hard time in my life. But to say that I'm grateful to have experienced that would be an understatement. Those moments I had to go through, and I haven't spoken about a lot of the kind of internal thinking that I was going through at that stage. You know, I'd like to share those in other videos. This would just be too long. But it got to the point where I was embarrassed and I was ashamed of who I was. My identity had been completely slashed. And for the next few years after that, I was desperately still trying to make the AFL. You know, I trained with VFL clubs, which is the second tier behind the AFL, and I was getting cut. You know, I went back and tried to compete in athletics again, had a really bad injury that sidelined me for 5 months. I was depressed all through that period. I went back to athletics to try and prove myself to, you know, whether it was AFL clubs, that I'm an elite athlete and I'm a good footballer, that I deserve this opportunity, and that didn't work for me either. And then I think by the time I was 22, I went back to VFL. No, 21 into 22, I went back for a VFL preseason. I trained unbelievably well. for myself, and I'm usually quite modest, but that was the case. And in the end, I just didn't get the opportunity. For whatever reason, there's so much politics that goes on that you beat yourself up over it. You're constantly overthinking and having these intrusive thoughts of what you're doing wrong, and you take that information on board as if you're a bad person, and I did for so long, and my identity, as I mentioned, was crushed. So there's just too much to go into, and I'm sorry if this has gone on for too long, but essentially I ended up at a point where my identity was destroyed. I was a university student who wasn't happy with what they were doing. I'm studying physio, and as a physio, it's almost as if you want to work in sports, the best case scenario is that you get to work with AFL clubs. So I was thinking about it, and I was thinking to myself, well, so the best case scenario for me is working for the people that I wanted to become, earning 1/10 of the money that these people are earning. And in my head, it just didn't make sense. And yes, I'm still studying to become a physio. And yes, it still doesn't make sense in my head. And yes, I'm trying to do something about it. But I was overcome with sadness. My identity was destroyed. And yeah. But I kept trying. And that's where the dream comes into it. The dream of playing AFL. And for so long I had this dream. But I had to weigh up, where does this dream actually come from? When you have a dream, whether you're a child or a teenager, you don't know at that stage who it is you truly want to become. And I didn't know who I truly wanted to become. All I saw were the external accolades that these people were receiving. Fame, money, status, community, friendship, love. All of these things that I saw these AFL players receive, and I put it on a pedestal, and I thought that's the only way I can get there. And maybe you're the same with the dream you have. Maybe your dream was shaped at a really young age before you had the experiences and I guess the mature line of thinking to actually think critically about who it is you want to become. You know, I feel as though we need to look inside ourselves, examine where those dreams actually came from, and figure out, does that dream actually align with who you are? It had to get to the point for me to sit in the car going to pre-season football training in the middle of the summer, almost in the point of tears, being like, I don't actually enjoy what I'm doing. I'm not in a flow state at this training, to sort of get to the point where, like, I've been clinging onto a dream for so long that doesn't align with who I am as a person. All I was thinking about was the external, I guess, recognition that you would get as a result of becoming a professional athlete. And that was what shaped essentially my whole life. So I guess as driven young men, as driven people, we cling so tightly to these dreams, whether it's from movies, TV, inspirational content online. We constantly hear this narrative of never give up, never give up. But what if it's actually okay for you to give up? What if giving up is actually necessary? What if giving up is actually required for you to fully unlock who you are as a person and to fully reach the summit of who you can be? And for me, I feel like that's something I'm only experiencing now. Yes, I've mourned the loss of my identity. Yes, I've mourned the loss of never becoming a professional athlete. But that dream that I held for so long, is that really my dream? Or is that the dream of my childhood self who was seeking praise, who was seeking recognition and seeking status from other people? And I truly believe that's what it was. If I think critically about what my dream is now, I think about the life and the outcomes that I want to live. I want to be happy. I want to be in flow state every day. I want to surround myself with brothers and people that I love. I want to be doing something that makes a difference in the world. And realistically, if I combine my passions, and as I mentioned, getting into a flow state every day, and I can achieve those outcomes as a result, that is my dream. I may not know necessarily what that exactly looks like right now, but that is my dream. If it doesn't send a firecracker up your ass, essentially, and light you up and fill you with excitement, then that dream isn't for you. You know, we hear this narrative of you must stick through the hard times, endure, endure, endure. Absolutely, you must endure through the challenging times that life presents to you. But there is a point where it becomes easier. If this is constantly a tough slog for you and you don't actually enjoy what you're doing, and you don't see a sustainable future in it, then you really need to ask yourself the question of, should I keep pursuing this dream that I've had? In those moments, I really think that you can give up on that dream. And when I say give up, I mean give up on that particular pursuit. Whether it's a sport, whether it's a job that you're not truly passionate about, it can be worth giving up. But what's not worth giving up on is you. What's not worth giving up on is what you see in your future. The love, family, connections, values, the worth that you want to provide to the world. That is never worth giving up on. It is worth giving up on dreams that are built upon foundations of ideas that are thrusted upon you by others from a young age. And it's so important that you identify those. And I'm not sitting here saying that if I was presented with the opportunity to become an AFL player right in this second, that I would say no. But having the setbacks, having the hardships, having your identity completely smashed to pieces does present you with this kind of different lens of thinking. And for me, not becoming an AFL player may be the biggest blessing that I've ever received. I'll never know. But in life, you can never be the victim in these scenarios. How you frame your thinking essentially shapes who you are. The most imprisoned we can ever be as people is by the confines that we set in our own minds. And it's the way you shape those experiences that really lend themselves to becoming who you are. And it's in those moments that giving up is okay. If you think for long periods of time, spend time in silence, and you consider, are these dreams really my own? And it turns out that it's not necessarily who you want to become as a person, or there are other avenues that instill you with such passion and flow, and you can achieve those outcomes, which I mentioned, brotherhood, love, connection, family, community, as a result of those actions, then by all means go for it. Follow your dreams at all costs, but make sure the dreams are your own. Make sure those dreams are built upon foundations that you, as a person who's experienced life, can form. Not a child who's 6, 7, 8 years old, built upon a fantasy of becoming a person that's celebrated so widely in our community. This is a really nuanced discussion and probably required more planning from my end. But essentially what I'm trying to get at is, sometimes the dreams that we set ourselves from such a young age can lead us down a path of having our identity destroyed. And that's what happened with me. And yes, that's important for your development. But if you're like me, you're in your early 20s, or you're a teenager, and you're despondent with how your life's turned up, closely examine whether those dreams are all that you could ever amount to as a person. You are so much more than those dreams, and you can live an amazing life that potentially had absolutely nothing to do with those dreams in the first place. But what you'll never lose is the person that you become from forming those dreams. The values that I've learned from striving as an athlete, of hard work, perseverance, grit, the importance of leaning on others for support, are invaluable, and I will be so grateful for those. I'm so grateful for all my experiences that I've gone through. But you also need to have the courage and the wherewithal to know when it may be time to let those go. Yes, I'm saying give up in certain scenarios, but never give up on yourself. Always push to become the best version of yourself that you can do. And yeah, while it may be required to give up on a certain sport, on a certain job, on a certain relationship, what you can never give up on is you, because we're all playing the game of life, and you can never give up on that. The game of life is so much broader than the narrow dreams that we hold so dearly and so closely. So open your horizons, really weigh up closely, what are my dreams? What are my hopes for the future? Is this the path that defines me? And only you can do that. And that's something that I'm coming out the other side of now. And look, if you found value out of this video, at least you'll have an idea of my story, which will be good because I'm documenting my running. It's more or less a time of significant change for me, and at least you'll have an idea of who I am. But I encourage you to think critically and think clearly and carefully around where your dreams were shaped, what influences they were shaped by, and who it is you truly want to become. Because chances are you're so much greater than those dreams. No one can hold value to who you really are. Only you can define that. So thanks again for watching, guys. I know this is probably a long video. I have no idea how long it is, but as I said, this is really important for me, and if this provides value to you, then that's absolutely amazing. So thank you.